All right. Chapter 8. I accept that when there are storms, the damnedest of excluded, excommunicated things, things that are leprous to the faithful, are brought down from the super Sargasso Sea, or from what for convenience we call the Super Sargasso Sea, which by no means has been taken into full acceptance yet. That things are brought down by storms, just as from the depths of the sea things are brought up by storms. To be sure, it is orthodoxy that storms have little, if any, effect below the waves of the ocean, but, of course, only to have an opinion is to be ignorant of, or to disregard, a contradiction, or something else that modifies an opinion out of distinguishability. That along the coast that along the coast of New Zealand, in regions not subject to submarine volcanic action, deep sea fishes are often brought up by storms. Iron and stones that fall from the sky and atmospheric disturbances. There is absolutely no connection between the two phenomena. The orthodox belief is that objects moving at planetary velocity would, upon entering the Earth's atmosphere, be virtually unaffected by hurricanes. Might as well think of a bullet swerved by someone fanning himself. The only trouble with the orthodox reasoning is the usual trouble. It's phantom dominant. It's basing upon a myth, data we've had and more will have of things in the sky having no independent velocity. There are so many storms and so many meteors and meteorites that it would be extraordinary if there were no concurrences. Nevertheless, so many of these concurrences are listed by Professor Baden Powell that one notices. The famous fall of stones at Siena, Italy, 1794, in a violent storm. See Greg's catalogues, many instances. One that stands out is a bright ball of fire and light in a hurricane in England, September 2nd, 1786. The remarkable datum here is that this phenomenon was visibly 40 minutes. That's about 800 times the duration that the Orthodox give to meteors and meteorites. See the annual register, many instances. In Nature, October 25th, 1877, and the London Times, 1815. No, London Times, October 15th, 1877, something that fell in a gale of October 14th, 1877, is described as a huge ball of green fire. This phenomena is described by another correspondent in Nature 17 10, and an account of it by another correspondent was forwarded to Nature by W.F. Denning. There are so many instances that some of us will revolt against the instance of the faithful that it is only coincidence, and accept that there is connection of the kind called casual. If it is too difficult to think of stones and metallic masses swerved from their courses by storms, if they move at high velocity, we think of low velocity, or of things having no velocity at all, hovering a few miles above this earth, dislodged by storms and falling luminously. But the resistance is so great here, and coincidence so insisted upon, that we'd better have some more instances. Aerolite in a storm at St. Leonard's on Sea, England, September 17th, 1885. No trace of it found. Meteorite in a gale, March 1st, 1886, described in the Monthly Weather Review, March 1886. Meteorite in a thunderstorm off coast of Greece, November 19th, 1899. Fall of the meteorite in a storm, July 7th, 1883, near Lake in Quebec. Same phenomenon noted in Nature 28 319, meteorite in a whirlwind, Sweden, September 24th, 1883. London Royal Society Proc 6 276, a triangular cloud that appeared in a storm December 17th, 1852, a red nucleus about half the apparent diameter of the moon, and a long tail, visible 13 minutes explosion of the nucleus. Nevertheless, in Science Gossip NS 6-65, it is said that though meteorites have fallen in storms, no connection is supposed to exist between the two phenomena except by the ignorant peasantry. But some of us peasants have gone through the report of the British Association, 1852, upon page 239. Dr. Buist, who had never heard of the Super Sargasso Sea, says that, though it is difficult to trace connection between the phenomena, 3 aerolites had fallen in 5 months in India during thunderstorms in 1851, may have been 1852. For accounts by witnesses, see page 229 of the report. Or we are on our way to account for thunderstones. It seems to me, very strikingly here, is borne out the general acceptance that ours is only an intermediate existence, in which there is nothing fundamental or nothing final to take as a positive standard to judge by. Peasants believed in meteorites. Scientists excluded meteorites. Peasants believe in thunderstones. Scientists exclude thunderstones. It is useless to argue that peasants are out in the fields and that scientists are shut up in laboratories and lecture rooms. We cannot take for a real base that, as to phenomena with which they are more familiar, peasants are more likely to be right than are scientists. A host of biologic and meteorologic fallacies of peasants rise against us. I should say that our existence is like a bridge, except that comparison is in static terms, but like the Brooklyn Bridge, upon which multitudes of bugs are seeking a fundamental, coming to a girder that seems firm and final, but the girder is built upon supports. A support then seems final, but it is built upon underlying structures. Nothing final can be found in all the bridges, because the bridge itself is not a final thing in itself, but is a relationship between Manhattan and Brooklyn. If our existence is a relationship between the positive absolute and the negative absolute, the quest for finality in its is hopeless. Everything in it must be relative. If the whole world is not a whole, but is itself a relation, and the attitudes of acceptance or pseudo-base is, cells of an embryo are in the reptilian era of the embryo. Some cells feel stimuli to take on new appearances. If it be of the design of the whole that the next era be mammalian, those cells that turn mammalian will be sustained against resistance by inertia of all the rest and will be relatively right, though not finally right, because they too in time will have to give way to characters of other eras of higher development. If we are upon the verge of a new era in which exclusionism must be overthrown, it will avail thee not to call us base-born and frowsy peasants. In our crude, bucolic way, we now offer an outrage upon common sense that we think will some day be an unquestioned commonplace, that manufactured objects of stone and iron have fallen from the sky, that they have been brought down from a state of suspension in a region of inertness to this earth's attraction by atmospheric disturbances. The thunderstone is usually a beautifully polished wedge-shaped piece of greenstone, says a writer in the Cornell magazine, 50-517. It isn't. It's likely to be of almost any kind of stone, but we call attention to the skill with which some of them have been made. Of course, this writer says it's all superstition. Otherwise, he'd be one of us crude and simple sons of the soil. Conventional damnation is that stone implements already on the ground in the first place, are found near where lightning was seen to strike, that are supposed by astonished rustics or by intelligence of a low order to have fallen in or with lightning. Throughout this book, we class a great deal of science with bad fiction. When is fiction bad, cheap, low? If coincidence is overworked, that's one way of deciding, but with single writers, coincidence seldom is overlooked. We find the excess in the subject at large. Such a writer as the one of the Cornhill magazine tells us vaguely of beliefs of peasants. There is no massing of instance after instance after instance. Here ours will be the method of mass formation. Conceivably, lightning may strike the ground near where there was a wedge-shaped object in the first place, again and again and again. Lightning striking ground near wedge-shaped object in China. Lightning striking ground near wedge-shaped object in Scotland. Lightning striking ground near wedge-shaped object in Central Africa. Coincidence in France. Coincidence in Java. Coincidence in South America. We grant a great deal, but note a tendency to restlessness. Nevertheless, this is the pseudo-tropism of science to all thunderstones, said to have fallen luminously. As to greenstone, it is in the Isle of Jamaica where the notion is general that axes of a hard greenstone fall from the sky during the rains. Some other time we shall inquire into this localization of objects of a specific material. They are of a stone nowhere else to be found in Jamaica. In my own tendency to exclude, or in the attitude of one peasant or savage who thinks he is not to be classed with other peasants or savages, I am not very much impressed with what natives think. It would be hard to tell why. If the word of the Lord Kelvin carries no more weight upon scientific subjects than the word of a sitting bull, unless it be in agreement with conventional opinion, I think it must be because savages have bad table manners. However, my snobbishness in this respect loosens up somewhat before very widespread belief by savages and peasants, and the notion of thunderstones is as wide as geography itself. The natives of Burma, China, Japan, according to Blinkenberg, not, of course, that Blinkenberg accepts one word of it, think that carved stoned objects have fallen from the sky because they think they have seen such objects fall from the sky. Such objects are called thunderbolts in these countries. They are called thunderstones in Morvea, Holland, Belgium, France, Cambodia, Sumatra, and Siberia. They're called storm stones in Lausitz, sky arrows in Slovenia, thunder axes in England and Scotland, lightning stones in Spain and Portugal, sky axes in Greece, lightning flashes in Brazil, thunder teeth in Ambonina. The belief is as widespread as is belief in ghosts and witches, which only the superstitious deny today. As to beliefs by North American Indians, Tyler gives a list of references. As to South American Indians, certain stone hatchets are said to have fallen from heavens. If you too revolt against coincidence after coincidence after coincidence, but find our interpretation of thunderstones just a little too strong or rich for digestion, we recommend the explanation of one Thales written in 1649. The naturalists say that they are generated in the sky by a fulgurous exhalation conglobed in a cloud by the circumfused humor. Of course, the paper in the Cornhill magazine was written with no intention of trying really to investigate this subject, but to deride the notion that worked stoned objects have ever fallen from the sky. A writer in the American Journal of Science 121-325 read this paper and thinks it remarkable that any man of ordinary reasoning powers should write a paper to prove that thunderbolts do not exist. I confess that we're a little flattered by that. Over and over, it is scarcely necessary to suggest to the intelligent reader that thunderstones are a myth. We contend that there is a misuse of a word here. We admit that only we are intelligent upon this subject, if by intelligence is meant by inquiry and equilibrium, and that all other intellection is only mechanical reflex. Of course, that intelligence too is mechanical, but less orderly and confined, less obviously mechanical, that as an acceptance of ours becomes firmer and firmer established, we pass from the state of intelligence to reflexes and ruts. An odd thing is that intelligence is usually supposed to be credible. It may be in the sense that it is mental activity trying to find out, but it is confession of ignorance. The bees, the theologians, the dogmatic scientists are the intellectual aristocrats. The rest of us are the plebeians, not yet graduated to nirvana, or to the instinctive and suave as differentiated from the intelligent and crude. Blinkenberg gives many instances of the superstition of thunderstones, which flourishes only where mentally is in a lamentable state, or universally. In Malacca, Sumatra, and Java, natives say that stone axes have often been found under trees that have been struck by lightning. Blankenberg does not dispute this, but says it is coincidence that the axes were, of course, upon the ground in the first place, that the natives jumped to the conclusion that these carved stones had fallen in or with lightning. In Central Africa, it is said that often have wedge-shaped, highly polished objects of stone, described as axes, been found sticking in trees that have been struck by lightning, or by what seemed to be lightning. The natives, rather like the unscientific persons of Memphis, Tennessee, when they saw snakes after a storm, jumped to the conclusion that the axes had not always been sticking in the tree. Livingstone says that he had never heard of stone implements used by natives of Africa. A writer in the report of the Smithsonian Institution, 1877-308, says that there are a few, that they are said by the natives to have fallen in thunderstorms. As to luminosity, it is my lamentable acceptance that bodies falling through the earth's atmosphere, if not warmed even, often fall with a brilliant light, looking like flashes of lightning. This matter seems important. We'll take it up later with data. In Prussia, 2 stone axes were found in the trunk of trees, one under the bark. The finders jumped to the conclusion that the axes had fallen there. Another stone axe, or wedge-shaped object of worked stone, said to have been found in a tree that had been struck by something that looked like lightning. The finder jumped to the conclusion. Story told by Blinkenberg of a woman who lived near Kolsbygården, Sweden, who found a flint near an old willow. Near her house. I emphasize near her house, because that means familiar ground. The willow had been split by something. She jumped. Cow killed by lightning, or by what looked like lightning, Isle of Sark, near Garensee. The peasant who owned the cow dung up the ground at the spot and found a small greenstone, axe. Blinkenberg says that he jumped to the conclusion that it was this object that had fallen luminously, killing the cow. A flint axe found by a farmer after a severe storm, described as a fearful storm by a signal staff, which had been split by something. I should say that nearness to a signal staff may be considered familiar ground. Whether he jumped or arrived at the conclusion by a mere leisurely process, the farmer thought that the flint object had fallen in the storm. In this instance, we have a lamentable scientist with us. It's impossible to have positive difference between orthodoxy and heresy. Somewhere there must be a merging into each other, or an overlapping. Nevertheless, upon such a subject as this, it does seem a little shocking. In most works upon meteorites, the peculiar sulfurous odor of things that fall from the sky is mentioned, Sir John Evans says with extraordinary reasoning powers. If he could never have thought such a thing with ordinary reasoning powers, that this flint object proved to have been the bolt by its peculiar smell when broken. If it did so prove to be, that settles the whole subject. If we prove that only one object of worked stone has fallen from the sky, all piling up of further reports is unnecessary. However, we have already taken the stand that nothing settles anything, that the disputes of ancient Greece are no nearer solution now than they were several thousand years ago, all because, in a positive sense, there is nothing to prove or solve or settle. Our subject is to be more nearly real than our opponents. Wideness is an aspect of the universal. We go on widely. According to us, the fat man is nearer godliness than is the thin man. Eat, drink, and approximate to be to the positive absolute. Beware of negativeness, by which we mean indigestion. The vast majority of thunderstones are described as axes, but Munier tells of one that was in his possession, said to have fallen at Gardia, Algeria, contrasting profoundment, pear-shaped with the angular outlines of ordinary meteorites. The conventional explanation that it had been formed as a drop of molten matter from a larger body seems reasonable to me, but with less agreeableness I note its fall in a thunderstorm, the datum that turns the orthodox meteorologist pale with rage or induces a slight elevation of his eyebrows if you mention it to him. Munier tells of another thunderstone, said to have fallen in North America. Munier, too, is a little lamentable here. He quotes a soldier of experience that such objects fall most frequently in the deserts of Africa. Rather miscellaneous now. Thunderstone, said to have fallen in London, April 1876, weighed about 8 pounds, no particulars as to shape. Thunderstone, said to have fallen at Cardiff, September 26, 1916. According to Nature 98-95, it was coincidence. Only a lightning flash had been seen. Stone that fell in a storm near St. Albans, England, accepted by the Museum of St. Albans, said at the British Museum not to be of true meteoric material. London Times, April 26, 1876. That April 20th, 1876, near Wolverhampton, fell a mass of meteoric iron during a heavy fall of rain. An account of this phenomenon in Nature 14-272 by H.S. Maskelyne, who accepts it as authentic. Also see Nature 13-531. For three other instances, see the Scientific American 47-194, 52-83, 68-325, as to wedge shape larger than could very well be called an axe. That May 27, 1884, at Tysnes, Norway, a meteorite had fallen, that the turf was torn up at the spot where the object had been supposed to have fallen, that 2 days later a very peculiar stone was found nearby. The description is, in shape and size, very like the fourth part of a large Stilton cheese. It is our acceptance that many objects and different substances have been brought down by atmospheric disturbance from what, only as a matter of convenience now and until we have more data. We call the Super Sargasso Sea, however, our chief interest is in objects that have been shaped by means similar to human handcraft. Description of the thunderstones of Burma, said to be of a kind of stone unlike any other found in Burma, called thunderbolts by the natives. I think there's a good deal of meaning in such expressions as unlike any other found in Burma, but that if they had said anything more definite, there would have been unpleasant consequences to writers in the 19th century. More about the thunderstones of Burma in the Proc-Soc Antique of London 2-3-97. One of them, described as an Ides, was exhibited by Captain Duff, who wrote that there was no stone like it in its neighborhood. Of course, it may not be very convincing to say that because a stone is unlike neighboring stones, it had foreign origin. Also, we fear it is a kind of plagiarism. We got it from the geologists who demonstrate by this reasoning the foreign origin of erratics. We fear we're a little gross and scientific at times. Hold on. Hold on. Let's see something. Let's see something. But it's my acceptance that a great deal of scientific literature must be read between the lines. It's not everyone who has the lamentableness of Sir John Evans, but as a just as a great deal of Voltaire's meaning was interlinear, we suspect that Captain Duff merely hints rather than to risk having a Professor Lawrence Smith fly at him and call him a half insane man. Whatever Captain Duff's meaning may have been, and whether he smiled like a Voltaire when he wrote it, Captain Duff writes of the extremely soft nature of the stone, rendering it equally useless as an offensive or defensive weapon. Story by a correspondent in Nature 35 53 of a Malay of considerable social standing. And one thing about our data is that damn though they be. And one thing about our data is that, damn though they be, they do not often bring us into awful good company. Who knew of a tree that had been struck about a month before by something in a thunderstorm? He searched among the roots of this tree and found a thunderstone. Not said whether he jumped or leaped to the conclusion that it had fallen, process likely to be more leisurely in tropical countries. Also, I'm afraid his way of reasoning was not very original. Just so were fragments of the Bath furnace meteorite accepted by orthodoxy discovered. We shall now have an unusual experience. We shall read of some reports of extraordinary circumstances that were investigated by a man of science. Not, of course, that they were really investigated by him, but that his phenomena occupied a position approximating higher to real investigation than to utter neglect. Over and over, we read of extraordinary occurrences, no discussion, not even a commitment, nope, not even a comment afterward findable, mere mention occasionally, burial and damnation. The extraordinary and how quickly it is hidden away. Burial and damnation, or the obscurity of the conspicuous. We did read of a man who, in the matter of snails, did travel some distance to assure himself of something that he had suspected in advance, and we remember Professor Hitchcock, who had only to smite Amherst with the wand of his botanical knowledge, and lo, 2 fungi sprang up before night. And we did read of Dr. Gray and his thousands of fishes from one pailful of water, but these instances stand out. More frequently, there was no investigation. We now have a good many reported occurrences that were investigated. Of things said to have fallen from the sky, we make in the usual scientific way 2 divisions: miscellaneous objects and substances, and symmetric objects attributable to beings like human beings, subdividing into wedges, spheres, and disks.